Welcome, everybody. And we've got a great episode here at the Complete Wealth Management Podcast. I've got a very amazing colleague and friend, somebody I've had the opportunity to get to know over the last, what's it been, Chris? Now over 4 years, I think we've been
Oh my God.
running around the country together.
2019, we started.
Chris, give us a little bit of background on your kind of professional side of things before we get into some of also, the episode topic today, which is charity and philanthropy, and something that I know you're an absolute expert in.
Thank you. Well, I've had really three distinct careers. I'm trained as a lawyer. I have an LLM in tax. The first third of my career, I was a business and estate planning lawyer, representing usually sellers of companies, and also led along the way to philanthropy. And I got recruited to become a director of planned giving at an R1 university, worked my way up to the number 2, then later became the head of planned giving at an Ivy League medical center, the Princeton Healthcare System Foundation. And then my third career has been in, quote, academe or practical academe. I held an endowed chair at the American College, then in Bryn Mawr, now in King of Prussia. And then I later headed the Advanced Designation Department at the College for Financial Planning out in Colorado. And along the way, since I saw a lot of good habits and practices of the people I worked with, I became in a position to give away money myself. And as I mentioned to you offline, it's now official. In the society, the Rushmore Society at the law school at Villanova, and I guess I can say philanthropy, first and last refuge of the scoundrel. I'll let the audience, as we listen, determine whether I'm the first or the last. But if you're in a position to give, I think it's very important you do.
Certainly, by way of technical background, Chris, there's not too many in the United States that I think, know as much as you know technically about the topic that we're going to talk about with your background and training. And then it certainly sounds like you've convinced a lot of people to give a lot of money away over your career, including yourself.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Some of the people that I worked with had great resources, and there's an IMPay designed building at Drexel University that I was involved with. There's a college named at Drexel after a very prominent wealthy family. So it's wonderful to do it. But what struck me about both of those situations, although there was a financial element to when they gave and how they gave, they really had to come to a core question: why do I want to do this? And that might be, a good jumping off point for any client who, by being in the right place at the right time, getting sound counsel from your firm, Dave, and your knowledge of taxes, decide, okay, I know I have more than I probably can ever spend. I think I have more than my kids can probably ever spend. So I want to start with philanthropy, but I really don't know how.
Yeah, that's a great topic. And I think in this episode, what we'll do is we'll progressively up the ante all the way to the point where you can get a university named after you. But let's kind of talk, on a smaller scale first, because we have a lot of clients at Allison Wealth that, to your point, they have a really great income. They've even started to accumulate some substantial assets, and they've realized like they have enough for themselves. Or quite frankly, even some of the clients that are still accumulating, they have such an income and they have causes that they care about that they want to carve out a portion of the income and be able to participate in different charitable efforts. And so, one of the things that I've really seen is that so many clients participate in what I would call checkbook philanthropy instead of strategic philanthropy. And what I want you to do is share some insight into kind of how to be a little bit more strategic and give some of our clients things that they can think about based on your personal experiences. But what I mean by checkbook philanthropy first is that, I know I'm guilty of this at times. Like, causes will come to me and say, hey, Dave, can you contribute to this? Or I go attend a fundraiser and, I like the cause and I write a small check, and it might be $100, it might be $500, it might be $1,000, but there's not a lot of strategy to it. It's very reactive. It's not proactive. It's not like us sitting down as a family and thinking about what our core values are and what our mission statement is. It's just, I'm out at an event and somebody's trying to do a fundraiser. And so, there's nothing wrong with that by any means for everybody who's doing things like that. I think it's a great way for, these different charitable entities to be able to raise some money. And David Roth is on here with us. Hey, David, good to see you.
Good to see you both.
So, and we know as we're talking with clients about this, there's certainly some tax benefits that you can kind of parlay in with your giving effort. Yeah. Now, for those of you who are taking the standard deduction, there's some things to think about in terms of if you're actually getting a tax break for giving to these charities and how you're giving. If you're itemizing your deductions, there certainly could be some other tax breaks, but there's also like all these different vehicles that we could use, right, Chris?
Oh, absolutely. And I'd like to combine what I call one of the Mount Rushmore tax deductions, and that is the gift of appreciated property, whether you give it directly to the charity or in a minute we'll talk about donor advised funds. But why do I have it on my Mount Rushmore of most important tax deductions? Well, think about it. Can you think of any provision in the code, and I know both of you are very versed in the code, where you legally can get a deduction in an amount greater than what you paid for it? You bought your Google at $1,000, it's now worth many multiples of that. You get the deduction at the many multiples over what you paid for it. That's extraordinary. And it's not even a tax preference item for the AMT. So that's wonderful. And then to the situation where a lot of clients may be in, where they really don't get a benefit of itemizing because the standard deduction is so high. Right now, a very good technique is to, in effect, bunch all your future contributions and put it in a donor advised fund. So maybe you give 5 years worth of contributions to the DAF. That's a public charity. You get the most favorable deduction amounts, like it's a war public charity. And you can parcel out the money as the need arises. So you can make thoughtful decisions. So to go back to your question, like everyone's asking you for money, you're invited to all the events, black tie or otherwise, and you feel compelled to give. When you've got, in effect, your charitable piggy bank, I think you can say, okay, that I got to be more thoughtful of this. And you can say, that's what the budget is. I'm not comfortable politely turning down requests for support. And depending on your resources or inclinations, you might adopt what I'll call the $1,000 test. And that is this a charity I think merits $1,000? If not, maybe you're just giving something because, you don't like turning people down. You were invited to the event. But is it $1,000 charity in your mind? Maybe it may be. You may not know enough to say it isn't. But that gets you a little more disciplined about why am I doing this? And there's been a study of philanthropists, and one of them is the 7 faces of philanthropy. And one of the faces of philanthropy is I'll put it in polite terms. You're a marketer of yourself, or the cruder term is you're a self-promoter. So you're giving very strategically so that you are known in your community as one of the go-to people, one of the reliable people to be supporting the charities. And there's frankly nothing wrong in that. But it's good to acknowledge to yourself why you're doing that.
Yeah. And one thing I would say that it's like kind of a light bulb that clicked with me when we're talking about this whole charitable giving and what to do. And maybe, Chris, you can expand on this a little bit more. Is Dave, you were saying that you have that checkbook mentality of doing it where you're writing a check. But I think what I've seen is when you plan this out, 2 things happen. One, you can be more intentional about where your money goes. And
Yes.
2, you can actually give more money. I mean, that was a big clicking point for me, is that if you are smart about this, you can actually give more to these charities than you would have if you just did it in a haphazard way. So you get to be more intentional, and you might have more that's going to net to them. So
Yeah, and I think the value of that too is every organization, from the most resourced to the least resourced, they have to prioritize who they're going to spend time with. And if you're already giving at a good level, you're going to be identified as someone for greater involvement. And there are donors who would like that. They would like to see the nuts and the bolts of how a charity goes about with their literacy programs or feed the poor programs or whatever. And then there are others. It's like, very interesting. It's wonderful. I have so many demands on my time. I can't do it. But maybe your spouse or your adult children can be involved. So, that's one of the advantages of being able to be a reliable and generous contributor. You're going to be given the opportunity to know these organizations at a deeper level, because that's good business on their end, because there's a sense in the general public that charities, they're not for profit, and they're these well-intentioned do-gooders who aren't really running a business. But that's not true. I mean, and the irony is, and I've observed this over my working career, the organizations that arguably least need the money, and I won't name names, but they have the easiest time getting it, because in part they know there's no question the organization's going to be around. There's no question or modest questions that it's well run and reasonably efficient. So there's a certain Darwinian survival of the fittest with the solicitation of funds as to who really gets them.
So what I'm really kind of hearing, and thinking about, how to think about your own strategic charitable giving, foundation, if you will, is, and I don't mean set up a charitable foundation. Yeah. I mean, the foundation of your household is, the first thing you need to do is make a plan. And the three things that, I've seen, and Chris, I'd love to hear your insight into these, is, number one, sitting down and mapping out what your family's core values are. I know running a business, this has been incredibly helpful in the businesses that I've had are establishing what the core values of the business, how we hire, how we reward, how we retain, how we promote the talent, right? And I think for a family to establish what those core values are, and then setting up and establishing some sort of family mission statement. And then to David's point, a corresponding budget of what your goals are. Do you have annual giving goals? I just met with a client more recently. They want to be able to give a huge amount of money each year, so not just wait till they're dead to give the money. Other clients, it's more modest, $5,000, $10,000, $15,000 a year. But Chris, kind of talk about those, those components of actually making a plan.
Yeah, you've alluded to it. What I'll call a charitable mission statement. And the goal is, with the mission statement first, to reach a resolution and put it down on paper. There's something powerful reducing all your thoughts and feelings to writing, because it stares back at you. And when you see it staring back at you, you may not quite agree as much as you thought, or you realize the need to make adjustments. So you're trying to figure out, what do you care about most? And maybe as an addendum, is there anything you're hoping to change? Are you trying to provide greater access to education, greater access to what I'll call food security? Those are great things. Also, it's the chance to take an inventory of what you're already giving to and asking yourself, going back to your earlier statements, like, why am I doing this? I mean, they ask me for money. I don't want to turn them down, but why am I really doing this? So values, causes, and then the last thing that I think people in the end come to answering this question, the region or where. No matter how many millions, hundreds of millions, billions, money will not solve the problem in full. I think it can ameliorate a lot of the worst parts of any problem, but you want to see where I can do the most good. The other advantage of doing that, by the way, is not only focusing your philanthropy, it's going to eliminate a lot of unnecessary requests from outside your jurisdiction. That in and of itself is a good thing.
Well, I
because
think that's such a great screen is because sometimes, especially if you've amassed a lot of money and start giving it away, I'm sure there's no shortage of people who are going to be reaching out and calling you to try to get more and more. And by having your core values and your family mission statement documented, it gives you a great screen of not necessarily what to say yes to, but more importantly, what to say no to.
yeah, I think that a common observation I'll hear of people who can give a lot is, I had no idea there were so many charities. uh, and they're just talking about their relatively small geographic jurisdiction. So I think that's important. And I think the other thing about having a systemized way of giving, it doesn't have to be through a foundation. But if it is through a foundation, at least you can say, okay, if it meets the guidelines, you may submit a formal request, but I alone am not the decider. It's got to go through a process. So, of course, if the result is not good, at the end you can blame the other members on the committee and keep your good standing.
What a lot of our clients do with like private equity investments. They'll be like, go talk to Dave, my advisor, and he'll vet it. And then I get to say no and be the bad guy so that you don't have to go tell your high school friend you're not going to give them $800,000 to invest in their startup.
No wonder you're wearing a black shirt.
That's right.
All you need now is the black hat.
Well, Chris, I want to talk about, so once a family, decides that charity is important and they want to build this strategic plan, they start to put in writing their values as a family, their mission statement. The other thing that we've seen to be really important is like how and when to start even involving children, because at the end of the day, some of these children might grow up in a more privileged lifestyle, obviously being mom and dad have, wealth. And if you're giving it all away, you want them to not have some animosity towards you giving their future inheritance away. You want them to be proactive, productive members of this charitable intent. And I just want to throw kind of three things out that I've seen and talked to clients about, and any experiences you have here, Chris, but kind of breaking it down into the most, relevant developmental years, because at the end of the day, if you're in your 60s or 70s and have a 40-year-old child who's just a loser, I don't know, there's probably not a ton we can do for you at that point. But, in their core developmental days, like when they're kind of toddlers or in that preschool age, I think the most impactful thing is just letting them see you, letting them observe you, helping construct that mindset or ideal around like maybe donating some of their toys or their clothes to people who don't have nearly as much as maybe they do. But then when they start to get into that school age, we wrote a book with a lady named Tish Rabe, she wrote a lot of Dr. Seuss's books once Dr. Seuss passed away. We did this on the bucket plan, but we kind of morphed it into three buckets: a spend bucket, a save bucket, and a give bucket. And so kind of sharing that with school age kids. And again, if you've established something like a family donor advised fund, something that we talk about with our clients is maybe sitting around the dinner table, talking and empowering the kids to research charities, and they could tap into that family's donor advised fund and make grants to the charities that they've done research on, or maybe they're participating in. And, I think that goes all the way into high school or college age, really, having them get involved with those charities that you're participating in or that they might participate in, or even establishing a giving account for them so that it's kind of built or ingrained into their lifestyle. But is there anything, you've seen of involving the children?
Well, I want to comment on that and why I heartily endorse it for two reasons. The first value I think you're teaching is your resources, your wealth. It's to be treated with respect and diligence. And I think the other great thing is it is going to be a window to what the real world is to your children, in that they're going to see suffering, they're going to see deprivation, they're going to see dysfunction. And that's sort of a controlled environment for them to begin to see it. And they can begin to ask themselves, how does this come to be? What can we do to ameliorate some of this? I think that's very important. And I agree with what you said about the 40-year-old. If you haven't successfully launched, so to speak, by 40, not much. I hate to write people off at such a relatively young age, given that I'm now 67, but that's you're probably not much you can do. The other thing about philanthropy, it's not going to, if your family's at its core dysfunctional, I'm not sure it's going to make it fully functional, but it might make it less dysfunctional. So that for those that have really great resources, getting the adult children involved in maybe having them on the investment committee of the family's investments. Maybe they're not voting, but they get to see the process. They get to hear the experts. They get to understand there's a way how money is deployed and how it's evaluated.
Well, and Chris, I want to kind of touch on, because I think that's such a great segue of like, if kind of number one is making a plan, your values, your family mission statement, your budget around this. I think number two is the roles and responsibility. And so this goes into who's going to participate in this with you? How are decisions going to be made? How often are you going to meet on this topic? And then what's everyone's role in this? Like, maybe somebody's really involved in networking. Maybe another person in your family or on your team is really good at analyzing. Maybe somebody's more the visionary. Maybe that's you, if it's your wealth of what you want the impact of this to be. But I think kind of writing out those roles and responsibilities, again, I go back to building a company. If you were going to build a company, you're going to have all of those roles and responsibilities. So maybe the participants are, children. Maybe they're immediate family members. Maybe they're extended family members. Maybe it's, somebody like us at Alex Law, your financial advisor, your tax advisor. There's attorneys who specialize in helping, in charitable giving. But again, writing those rules of engagement out, who's going to participate? How will decisions be made? How often are you going to meet? Brings me kind of into that idea of a family meeting, having an agenda, establishing a location, determining what activities you're going to participate in. I think all of those are so important. Chris, any thoughts on that?
You're hitting all the nails on the head. What I think I could add is also the dreaded S word, and the dreaded S word, it's a polite word, succession. You have a business. Every business that's well run has a succession plan in case some disaster happens. And when you have the teenagers, the younger adults involved in the investing and seeing the process of how advisors, not just financial, but legal and accounting, IT people, if you've got a family office, you in effect you as the oldest generation, you're doing the on-the-job training of them. So when the time comes, when the oldest generation may feel the time is ready to increase the involvement of the younger people, and they know, and that's sending a message to the next younger generation. They've got to do the same for their children. So if you're really talking about a dynastic tradition of giving, you're really doing all the hard work up front. Because I think it's hard. I think it's hard where you haven't given much thought to succession. The older generation's trying to cling for whatever their motivations. They're not involving the kids as much. I think they regret that. I haven't. The people I've known over the years, I think their biggest regret is they didn't involve their children earlier. They regret later.
I want to kind of wrap up this episode with two. One is, how, and I want to briefly talk about the how. But before I do that, Chris, I'd love your personal perspective, because I know, over your lifetime, you've gone from where you're just giving money, right? Giving resources to you and your wife also are participants. I believe, are you still on MIT's Brain Research Board?
Yes, we are. We're still being reminded regularly of fully achieving our philanthropic potential, but we're doing great. My wife and I don't have children. In the end, they'll get something very nice, 7 figures easily. But, we're doing a great job now. On my wife's 40th anniversary of graduating, I wanted to endow a research fund for psychiatric illnesses. My wife was a medical doctor, psychiatrist. When I was first able to do something that was bigger than writing a check, I endowed a scholarship at the Jesuit prep school my parents wanted me to attend. And that was one where I definitely regretted I didn't do it sooner, though my mother got to see it in action for nearly 9 years before she passed away. So I'm more focused on what I want to do. There's some others, my law school, where I've taught since 2009 and created a course in charitable giving and wealth management. And then when a naming opportunity became available, it was actually a classroom that I've taught many times. When that became available, I said the heavens were aligned. I'm going to do it. It was maybe sooner than I wanted to do it, but I decided it's available. And sometimes you just give. And the other thing that I think could be relevant to your clients is I'm a big believer in not only proactive philanthropy, but preemptive philanthropy. If you're capable of a lot, the word does filter out despite your best efforts to not have a LinkedIn profile or not having a social media account, as is the case with me. But they, people do tend to, if they have good research, they can find out. But I like to identify things of interest to me or my wife and decide to fund them. You can always say no. I always find if you're being solicited, the best thing to do is just literally bite your tongue and then wait for the fundraiser to say something, because they will probably break before you do. And as Dave knows, as my background as a lawyer, I'm just way too accustomed to saying no to a lot of ideas.
So here's what I want to end the episode with, and this has been great, Chris. I mean, again,
Thank you.
I think my biggest takeaway from this, even thinking about myself and how I could adapt this into my family, is, number one, going back and kind of outlining what my own core values and kind of that family mission statement, and, who and how. Of course, as you know, Chris, I have a 7-year-old. She's starting to understand more and more of this. I have a 5-year-old and then the 2-year-old, but, it's not like they're heavily involved in the decision-making process now.
But it's good. They know there's a world outside of everything that they want. And, I was chuckling to myself when you were telling about giving away the toys. As a kid, I definitely had way more toys than I had. And one day I came back from school in like 3rd grade and, found out my mother and father had given away half the toys away to the Salvation Army. That was not one of my shining moments, I'll just say that. But hey, I'm a kid.
60-something years later, it's still in your head. You might need to talk to your wife about this.
I have.
But as your doctor.
Oh, I have. Well, I'm the world's longest continuing research and observation project in psychiatry since I'm married to one.
Well, here's what I want to kind of land the airplane with in this episode. Sure. So as we're thinking about giving, there's these elevated areas on a technical side. And David, I know this is what I messaged David today saying, if you want to come on, go ahead. If you want to duck out, me and Chris could handle this episode. And he said, anytime I get to talk about taxes, I'm in.
Yeah, so, I love it. So this is great.
For a client, of course, giving outright cash is absolutely okay. And there's some limitations on how much you can deduct in any given year. And if you're not itemizing your taxes, your deductions, you're probably not getting a tax benefit for that.
Correct.
The second level, and what we generally would advise, is if you're going to give somebody or something money, give them highly appreciated investments, non-retirement stuff, because again, you paid a low amount, but you get the tax deduction, as Chris said, based on whatever the current market value is. And now there's also another limitation for how much you can deduct of that type of giving in any given year. And it goes on your itemized deductions again.
Yeah, when you're giving appreciated property, generally the limitation is 30% of your adjusted gross income. If you're giving cash, it's 60% of adjusted gross income. And both those cases were assuming you're giving directly to a publicly supported charity, and that's not hard to find out. I mean, you just ask the charity for their tax exempt letter, or if you're more a trust but verified type of person like I am, you'll take the letter, but you'll also look at publication 78 to see if they're listed among the tax exempt organizations.
Yep.
Publication 78's online.
So the third level then is maybe you need the tax deductions today, but you want to be able to dole that money out into the future over the next whatever, 1, 3, 5, 10, 15, 20, as long as you're alive. That's where a donor advised fund, it's basically just an investment account we could open at Schwab or at Fidelity. You could make the gift and put the assets in and get the full tax deduction, but then you could make grants in the future from that donor advised fund. So it's like creating your own family charitable fund for you to give from in the future.
Yeah, and if you like having the name foundation, the donor advised funds, they'll call it the Woehrle Family Foundation if that's what really excites you. And the thing that I think is a great positive about the donor advised fund, one, you have a right, you as the donor, you have the right of recommendation. And, theoretically, your recommendation could be turned down by the donor advised fund. But that realistically is not going to happen unless you're requesting recommendations to charities that are on the terrorist watch list. So that's not good. You're not going to do that. And the other good thing is, if you have a donor advised fund, you will be able to maintain the relationship with the investment advisor. So if you've got a really longer term strategy for growing the donor advised fund, and you want more equity, alternative investments, whatever, you have the right of recommendation. So that, again, that is a fantastic way of continuing relationship with your advisor. I hope the audience has seen how just interlinked just the investing is with the giving of gifts. For some people starting out, I think they think there's a bifurcation of the two, but it's important to have very good investment counsel to what you're doing.
So those are kind of the three ways I would say that the 95% are going to use to give. Then there's much more advanced things like setting up your own foundation. And I think there's a lot of misconception. We could do a whole podcast episode just on this. We're not going to get into it here. But Chris, what's your kind of dollar limit? If somebody was going to say, Chris, should I set up my own private foundation? I mean,
well, first I'll try to raise some ugly questions that may be lurking in the back of a parent's mind. If your adult son or daughter is really unemployable, the foundation will not be probably a good vehicle to pay him or her a high six-figure salary, because the compensation has to be reasonable. You're going to really have to have an outside compensation study. So for a foundation that may just have several $1 million in it, you're not really going to be paying your children more than, I'm picking a somewhat arbitrary number, but $100,000. The other thing to keep in mind about people who think they want to have a private foundation, you will need to run the business and be like Caesar's wife. You're going to have to be above all reproach. Why? Because the documents you're going to file for the private foundation, the 990, are documents of public record. And every 3 or 4 years, every major organization like a ProPublica, they'll study them. They have time. They're looking for ideas, and they'll chronicle some abuse about excessive pay or excessive travel. So assume everything you do is being looked at, and if you're someone who walks the straight and narrow, you have nothing to hide. But to go back to your question, is there what's sort of the rock bottom number? If you talk to lawyers, in New York or out in Silicon Valley, they may say 10 million. If you talk to lawyers and investment advisors outside of those areas, something less than 10, maybe 2 million, maybe 5 million. It is a lot of paperwork, and despite your client, the donor's best intentions about, look, Professor Woehrle, it's paperwork. I can complete these, 110-line forms. Well, what is it? The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. It's a lot of hard work to really understand what the forms mean. But if you want to do it, do it.
So really, it adds risk and complexity, and those
risk and disappointment.
And disappointment. And the last thing is the charitable trust, because there's a charitable remainder trust, which is a split interest trust. And when I say split interest, it means you or your estate gets some of the benefit and the charity gets some of the benefit.
Yeah, I think for clients that are in a position to consider some really meaningful philanthropy, you want to look at the charitable lead trust. That's an arrangement where the front end, the payments, they're going to charities that you can direct, and then the remainder interest can go back to you as the establisher, the grantor, and you get an income tax deduction, or it could go to your children. Sometimes you'll see in the lead trust described as a deferred inheritance trust, meaning your kids are going to get it. And what can be fantastic about it is let's say you put $1 million in a CLT, and at the time your children get it, it's worth $5 million. That $4 million is not subject to gift tax. And on the front end, you can devise the payout rate so that $1 million you put in, it's not even subject to gift tax itself, so you don't have to use any of your current exemption. So that's very powerful.
And so with all of these techniques, there's complexity to think through which one's right for you. There's huge tax benefits to do it right. But at the end of the day, the tax should not dictate the decision, right? If you give money away to charity, you're giving at a rate of 100%, and so the tax rate's only 40 or 50%. The charitable gift is always going to be bigger than the tax rate itself. And so this is for, I think, anybody who's made it this long in the podcast. I'm sure you're not doing this just looking for that next tax dodge on YouTube or Facebook Reels. This is legitimate stuff to bring value to the charities. But yes, there are nice tax benefits along the way that you'll also achieve.
Yeah, I think to end with this idea of donor motivation, a lot of philanthropists are what I'll call repayers. They're very grateful for the education they receive. They're very grateful for the health care they received. They're very grateful for the religious instruction they received. So they're big drivers. And then I think there are others that just think it's the right thing to do. And then there are others who believe in an afterlife where there's going to be an accounting at the end of days of your time, talent, and treasure. They want to make sure they're racking up enough tangible evidence of the good that they're doing and that they have been a good steward of what they've received.
Fantastic. Well, this was great, Chris. I appreciate you jumping
Thank you.
sharing your experience and wisdom with us here, and look forward to seeing you soon.
Well, and you can edit this out at the end, so I'm saving it at the end, but you have my great respect and admiration. You know so much of the tax code off the top of your head. And the amazing thing to me is, unlike a lot of lawyers, you can explain it in a way that makes great sense. And, I feel very privileged to be able to work with you on the tax management journey. We do have a lot of fun. I mean, I never could understand why people think taxes is boring. I mean, it's like, I never can get my head around that.
I'm with you on that one.
Very good.
All right, guys. Well, have a great week, and I'll see you soon.
Planning and advisory services are offered through Prosperity Capital Advisory, PCA, an SEC-registered investment advisor with its principal place of business in the state of Ohio. Allison Wealth Management and PCA are separate, non-affiliated entities. PCA does not provide tax or legal advice. Insurance and tax services offered through Allison Wealth Management are not affiliated with PCA. Information received from this video should not be viewed as individual investment advice. Content may have been created by a third party and was not written or created by a PCA-affiliated advisor and does not represent the views and opinions of PCA or its subsidiary. For information pertaining to the registration status of PCA, please contact the firm or refer to the Investment Advisor Public Disclosure website. For additional information about PCA, including fees and services, send for our disclosure statement as set forth on Form ADV from PCA using the contact information herein. Please read the disclosure statement carefully before you invest or send money.